Hi guys, and welcome to another episode. Today I'm really excited because I'm sitting down with somebody who's kind of been a little bit of a mentor to me in the space, and somebody I would definitely consider a friend. I've learned a lot from them. I want to introduce you to Verlin Gradney, who is an early startup investor and has been in securities, wealth management, and venture capital his whole life. Also, consequently, the owner of Trade Desk Advisors and Mindset Startup Academy, who basically teaches and advises entrepreneurs on how to raise money and get their projects and businesses off the ground. So Verlin, really excited that you're here today. Looking forward to chatting with you about kind of securities tokens and securities in general. Thanks so much for doing this interview, and thanks for sitting down.
Absolutely. I'm excited. We've been talking about this for a while, so I'm looking forward to it today.
Yeah, me too. For anybody who doesn't know Verlin, as I mentioned, Verlin is kind of an educator in the space and was kind enough to take I think it was the better part of a month when we first started chatting, just teaching me about the various types of security raises and compliant fundraising, because I really think that's something that's lacking in the space. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about securities, security tokens, and how the industry could be improved by some of the legitimacy that the securities industry brings. I guess to kind of kick it off, Verlin, because I think a lot of people in at least my audience might be familiar with cryptocurrencies and they hear the word securities tossed around a lot, but just to break it down on a really basic level, what is a security and how does it relate to raising money or raising capital for an early stage startup?
No, it's a good question. I think a good place for us to start, because it's whenever we're working with a startup or a later stage company, regardless of their background or heritage, this is something of a fundamental nature that everyone has to really focus on. Yeah. So granted, there are a million shades of gray to securities law, but if we were to sort of start to unpack this, essentially there are about 4 or 5 primary laws here in the States that govern a majority of what we do from a financial security perspective. You got your Securities Act, your Investment Advisors Act, your Investor Company Act. These are touching all aspects of financial services, banking, anything security related. But when we narrow that universe down to specifically individuals and or entities who are going to go out into the market, solicit capital for the benefit of bringing in investment, that little world right there, we can sum it up pretty much in what we call the 2 different doors. So the first thing we have to figure out is what would really define an actual security-related transaction in the context of capital raise. So what companies, regardless, ICOs, blockchain, or traditional lines of work, is anytime a company, or to be very technical, an issuing company, is intending to go out into the market and solicit individuals to create a barter, exchange, or investment, i.e., anytime you are exchanging any form of value, particularly equity, in exchange for capital, for favor, notice I said value, not necessarily currency, then the regulators in the Security Exchange Commission are going to define that as a securities transaction. And the reason I always state that, Matt, and this is really important for any of the listeners because we focus on this with the clients, what we're really saying in here is, trust us, they've seen everything. Don't get crafty, right? Yep. When they say, they're not, they didn't give me a check, they didn't send me a wire. No. This is any exchange of value for equity in your company. And that goes down to beneficial ownership rules, anything from favors. We've seen homes, we've seen cars, we've seen all different types of stuff. So the SEC is really good at throwing a broad blanket over what an actual security transaction is.
Of course.
Now, once we know that we're in or about to conduct a securities transaction, the next thing that a company has to define is, what are my rules or obligations? So the way we like to explain it is the SEC gives companies or issuing companies one of 2 doors. Okay. The first door is, you can come in here and register your securities with us. That's an actual registered security. And essentially what that means is you must go through the formalities of filing all your paperwork with the SEC, waiting for their responses, going through the back and forth process, and then hope and pray that you actually get approved.
Yeah.
Now, for a majority of startups, this is complete over-engineering. It could operate like a little mini IPO. And as you can imagine, when you're dealing with a regulator and bouncing information back and forth in paperwork, you got to have attorney. It's a costly process. So because they can't force every company out there in the world, or the US particularly, to do that, they give you door number 2, which is you can file an exemption with us. And what an exemption means is we take all those laws and we zero in on something referred to as Regulation D.
Yeah.
And Regulation D within the Securities Act essentially defines all of the rules of engagement and the rules of the road when you want to go out and create a securities transaction, bypassing the opportunity to register your securities.
Yeah, and just to roll this back a little bit and give it a little bit of context, because I think that that's important. There may be some people from the cryptocurrency side that are probably asking, like, why do I care about securities? Why does this matter to me? And I think that really we're going through this kind of change in the industry right now. 2017 was this crazy year, and you had these projects that literally they would put up a website and they would put up a white paper and they would raise $15 million because the cryptocurrency industry was going crazy. But what we've seen in the recent years, we kind of went into a little bit of a bear market with cryptocurrency, is that this is going away. Your ability to be able to put up, and I think that that's for the better, because ultimately a lot of people saw what was happening and saw how easy it was to raise capital with these ICOs in the cryptocurrency space, and they ripped people off. They took their money, they put up these web pages, they made $20 million and they disappeared. So I think just to give it context, we're in the middle of a really big change with cryptocurrencies. We've got a lot of rules coming into effect with the, FATF and FinCEN, AML, KYC being kind of important. But another one of these changes is the fact that a lot of these businesses aren't able to raise that capital through that ICO. It's just everything is kind of changing substantially. I think that that might be for the better because there's a certain amount of vetting that's required, which means that the projects that are raising at least have some sort of accountability. What are your thoughts on kind of this emergence of this regulated market with digital assets, and how do you think it's all going to play out?
Well, and some might consider me biased in this particular case, since everything we do is such a strong tilt towards regulatory and compliance rules.
Yeah.
But I think it should be looked at as a good thing, right?
Yeah.
I think the natural knee-jerk reaction in an emerging market is, oh boy, here comes Big Brother. What the hell are they doing here? We can handle this. But if you think about it, yes, it could go overboard. Yes, potentially it could crush an emerging market, and it has. History has shown it. However, if there can be a proper balance, if it's a two-way street, what forms of strong regulation does is it adds a certain level of legitimacy and actually opens up the market, right? Because you and I have talked a lot about my philosophy when looking at the investor market. We define it in 2 buckets, which is traditional and non-traditional. Traditional is, as the word entails, is as business has gone on for the last 100 years in the stock market, right? There's certain things that they follow. There's certain ways we read information in the tea leaves. There's certain information we react. And we do all of this with never really thinking about the fact that there are governmental regulatory rules that provide us some level of safety and confidence, right?
Yeah.
If I go out to my broker right now at Wall Street and I say, what's the price of that stock? And he says $472. Do you scratch your head and go, should I trust this guy? No, it's $472. Why? Because we know that based off the regulatory rules inside of that process, you'd have to be a real idiot to tell me it's 472 and it's really 225. I mean, the SEC penalty rules, when you are in a fiduciary status, a lot of times put your personal net worth at stake.
Yeah.
I mean, so they put the fear of God into people. Now, we might take that for granted, but that simple ability to hear what the price is, not think twice and act, is what allows trillions of shares every single day to move in an 8-hour period.
Yeah.
Now, are there certain people within those trillions of shares that go, gosh, there was a darn regulation, I could have moved more? Probably. You're not going to please everyone. So when we take it in that particular lens and we look at what ICOs can be able to do, to your point, it got to the point where it got a little hysterical, right? Oh, I got a white paper, I got a web page, my price is $225. People reacted like they do in the traditional markets and went, oh, really? It's $225? Okay, here you go. In reality, it was 5 cents or 10 cents or 3 cents. And then all of a sudden, boom, bad press, every headline. Now your traditional investors are watching all of this, right? So what do you think what they're saying? They're going, look at these cowboys. Are you kidding me? I'm not putting my money in there. And then you've got the other sector of the market, which is your non-traditional capital. Now, these are the folks that I don't necessarily consider cowboys. They're opportunistic. And this is a really important point because we were talking about this at dinner the other night. Yeah. Let's bypass current realities because I think in order to know our future, we have to know our past. Let's go back to about 100 years, okay, when the stock market was there. Not a computer in sight, no such thing as internet. You were literally on a floor screaming your name with a ticket in your hand to buy a share. Yeah. Now, without information sharing back then, the whole point of investing was to find an opportunity in the market where you believed the pricing was mismatched. You kept that close to vest, you didn't tell anyone, and you exercised that opportunity to gain that value. That's what investing was, right? Yeah. It couldn't be more opportunistic. Yeah. Now, as time has gone on and people bent the rules and all, and technology's now in place, transfer forward over a century later, now you're in a world where there probably in the next 10 years will not be anyone left on that stock exchange floor. The computers are doing everything, yeah. Which means when the computers are doing everything, that ability, as Warren Buffett said decades ago, what I did to make my wealth and find mispricing in stocks doesn't exist anymore, right? Yeah. So therefore, there will always be a segment of the society in the investor world that goes, yeah, I'll invest and play in everyone else's sandbox. But there's still something in the way that we're wired that I want to be opportunistic. So they're going to constantly find those things. And I think when we saw that Russian ICO, I think it's important to look beyond what the trend was and get deeper into the behavioral finance of that market. I believe a lot of that was fueled by that opportunistic section of our opportunities. Yeah. And we have to be really intellectually honest when we do this. This doesn't mean that everyone that moved all those billions and trillions of dollars did it for the sake of crypto. They did it for the sake of an opportunity. Yes, there's a subset of that crypto space that did it strictly to help build this ecosystem because they believed in its mission and what it could do. So when you take that opportunistic nature of people that really drove a lot of these things and you begin to throw up a lot of bad press, then a lot of that starts to kind of pull back. So back to the earlier point, is regulation a good thing? I think it's a great thing if cryptocurrency can stand at equal footing with a publicly traded stock. And you sitting as the investor have two options to look at. Do I buy Tesla or do I buy this crypto? And you call your broker and you say, how much is Tesla and how much is the crypto? He gives you the price and you never second guess it. Yeah. That's the way non-traditional begins to gain market share of traditional. If you're a crypto, an issuing company, and you have a cryptocurrency, do you want 1 million people to market to, or do you want 100 million people to market to? Well, in order to gain that audience, you've got to be able to create those standards.
For sure. And that kind of segues into a couple other questions that I was going to chat with you about. One of those, of course, we mentioned there's a massive hole now in the ability for people to be able to raise funds. And I know because I work in the industry and I work with a lot of these people, and it's a coming of age of regulation. And then if you want to be able to raise capital, you have to follow the rules now, which is where people like you come in, along with Mindset, your advisory service, and of course the videos and the educational aspect that you have. I'll make sure I put a link to that below. But you also kind of mentioned something that also touched a little bit. There's something that's coming up that a lot of people are talking about, and that really boils down to security token offerings. And you had kind of mentioned that previously, there's a bunch of crazy guys screaming with a piece of paper. The securities market in itself, as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, is a little bit antiquated, and mostly in the sense that there's some inefficiencies in the current system that I think the blockchain could help to fill. And I was kind of wondering what your thoughts might be on that, as it boils down to kind of custody of funds, smart contracts, instant transfer of money, permissioned accounts to be able to tie together some of the inefficiencies. What are the inefficiencies in the way that securities are moved right now? And do you think there's opportunity for blockchain and security offerings to be able to improve that process on kind of the regulated side?
Sure, and this is a good one. If I may get on my soapbox here a little bit, because it's a really important question that you ask, but it's a rather loaded one at the same time, right? And And the reason I kind of take my time with this is the same reason we take our time when we're actually dealing with a fintech company. So we do a lot of work in the SaaS, software as a service, and fintech, where we get these very technical guys that are really in love with the IP and the technology, which is good, as they should be. But oftentimes can be, and no offense given, slightly introverted, maybe not the best of explaining this to someone who's not at their equal level of knowledge or understanding.
Absolutely.
So a lot of what we're doing is not changing their stripes or DNA of what their mission is or the DNA of that organization, but we have to create derivatives of that value, saying things in a different way, message and spirit still the same, but we have to point that message at different stakeholders for which your project or your product or service is intended, right? So let's take a look at, say, as you stated, STOs and blockchain related in terms of adding efficiency to the overall sort of ecosystem of securities. So if you were the fintech company, I'd say, okay, you're blockchain and you're going in to help expedite the way that companies are actually managing the securities, smart contracts, all the different things that you can imagine and we hear about. We'll say, okay, well, let's dissect that a little bit, okay? Because in order for us to win over this value and determine whether or not we can essentially eat the dinner of a majority of the current infrastructure, we have to understand the stakeholders. So if I want to prove value of my blockchain technology via my STO to the way that securities are managed, I have to be able to explain it to the actual seller, to the buyer, and then don't forget the way that the current infrastructure in the world is set up is right in the middle, which is your TPAs, your third-party administrators, your custodians, your record keepers. These are the terms that have been created over the last 100 years that manage that transaction. So we see a lot of these blockchain companies that are trying to duplicate the replication of value that record keepers, third-party administrators, and custodians do. So when they said, okay, now wait a minute, take myself. I was a wealth manager, right? So I'd manage money. If you're the STO coming to me for the blockchain piece, you're going to have a hard time selling me. Why? Because the custodians and the record keepers have made my life easy. If I got to do anything, I pick up the phone, I click a button, it's done.
Yeah.
Same thing for the person on the other end of that transaction. Everything is done in the middle. So the question that I always have for a lot of the STOs in the blockchain related spaces, okay, so where's our value proposition in this particular case? A lot of times what we're seeing these young, really intelligent, bright companies coming in and bringing blockchain technology to simply replicate what record keeper TPAs and custodians are already doing. And the way that they're doing it is they're removing a lot of the current resource, i.e. cost, that is involved in the management and implementation of the stuff and replicating it with the blockchain space. So, okay, I'll buy that for $1. Yeah. The next question is, what are we doing with that savings of resource? Does the blockchain STO company plan on keeping that and giving a small haircut or discount to the buyer and the seller side of the fence? Are you going to essentially give that information and allow the buyer side to just do it for themselves? Are you going to take that information and allow the seller side to do it for themselves? So when we're trying to understand what value and how much legs this concept of blockchain simplifying the security industry, we got to take a step back and figure out, where are you pointing? Where are you aiming at, right? Do you want to put the custodian, record keeper out of business? Or do you want to empower the seller of those securities to say, hey, why are you giving away 25 basis points, 500 basis points sometimes is what we'd pay? Do you understand that behind the scenes when you give that order, he's just clicking 3 buttons? Let me give you the 3 buttons yourself, right? And then the buyer and the seller are saying, oh gosh, I can't imagine all of this stuff. And the blockchain company saying, no, actually, it's really simple. It's not complicated. So I think the blockchain ability to sort of synthesize and make efficient most of the banking and financial services is there. We have to find what that value proposition has been. And I think a lot of times they're trying to again, replace those entities, but I think they're bearing the lead. Because again, we're very big on dissecting and going macro. The reason that set of companies and institutions exist is because for the last 60 years, they told the people that were interacting, oh, don't worry about this. This is crazy chaos math stuff. I mean, this is complicated stuff. These guys got big degrees, right? They're putting the fear of God in you that, oh, I can't handle this. Why would I want to? You know what? You're right. And then what's happened is every financial service company, anyone in the payments processing space, we've gotten to the point where it's totally out of sight, out of mind. We just look at it as a cost of doing business because it's easy. So we're clicking buttons. Ask a company, and I was guilty of this myself, who was involved in doing this level of transactions and trades. I can tell you what my rent cost or my electric bill. I couldn't tell you how much they were actually taking out of my pocket.
That's what I think. I hear. Yeah. No, that makes perfect sense. What I think I'm hearing you say is something that I've kind of echoed before. And it boils down to the solutions that we're producing have to have inherent advantages. And I hear one of the inherent advantages, people are pretty comfortable right now. So it has to be, there's a little bit of blockchain friction. So one of the things that we need to do is ensure that we remove that. It has to be as easy as traditional systems. But also if you are creating kind of an STO environment, it also has to be cheaper, because ultimately if you can kind of knock off those two things, then you stand a chance at gaining some ground. But you really have to be focused with the advantages that you are bringing over kind of traditional systems. And they have to be evident, they have to be easy, and they have to be self-explanatory. Is that essentially it?
Yeah, and with one other friendly amendment, and that is understanding who the intended audience is. I think if I had one gripe, I see too many great blockchain ideas that don't have a market.
Yeah.
Now, for us guys, and we have to be the bearer of bad news a lot of times because we're the ones that are going to take you to market. Did you create a good idea and then go to find the market, or did you understand the market and then create a product? That's two different things. And I think a lot of times the blockchains that we see is a phenomenal product, but where's its home? Where are you aiming it? And a lot of times when we create a great product, they're like, look, I made a better mousetrap than the industry. Great. What do we do with it? Are you telling me that you want to take on the industry and the financial institutions? Because they're going to squash you like a bug. Or did we create a product and service to empower the stakeholders that are interacting with those behemoths and telling a story of saying, hey, stop giving away all this money. I'm here to dispel the truth. It's not that complicated.
Yeah.
You click a button now, I'll allow you to click a button. I'm going to save you 100 basis points in every single one of those transactions. And this is what that savings means to you, right? But it's not always about value too. You look at the blockchain and the ledger capabilities here. Another one that I see bearing the lead on, the value of smart contracts. What about cap tables properly put upon blockchain for everyone to be able to see? These are things that I think a lot of times aren't being sold well enough by a lot of the blockchain companies, because it's not just about cost. There are a lot of stakeholders that are going to be involved directly or indirectly with your product who have these type concerns, that pay heavy compliance costs, that pay heavy errors and emissions insurance to operate their business.
Yeah.
That would love to hear that type story. So it's not always about cost.
For sure. Yeah, you kind of mentioned that the 2017 bull run kind of took the traditional investing space kind of just, they sat back and they watched, and they were probably pretty shocked. Of course, I'm sure some participated, but people who were probably familiar in traditional investing were watching all this unfold. We're watching, a lot of the issues that came up with people essentially scamming people out of money, creating these products, whatever else. What are kind of the thoughts of traditional investors? And there's two very different parts of this. You've got investing in kind of traditional tokens or assets, and then you've got investing in new blockchain companies by traditional investors who are looking to raise capitals and doing a security raise. How are they right now sitting outside? How are they looking? How's that changed, and how do you see that playing out in the future?
Good question. And I could probably synthesize these answers more, so forgive me if they're long-winded. But you drop a very important distinction, and that is, where are the tea leaves going? Where's the wind blowing? Yeah. If we were to look at this as a race or a competition, I think it's hands down for most people who analyze the markets as we do, that the benefit and effect of blockchain is far more sexy and interesting than the actual cryptocurrency model itself. I think that's pretty evident. And I think there's a number of reasons why. if you look at what blockchain is doing, particularly to financial related industries, let's just assume that one. It's doing a lot for real estate, right? You've got countries that are looking at taking land deeds and every contract and marriage license you've ever done and putting it on blockchain. That's a whole separate other question. Let's just look at the financial industry. The reason that it is growing in momentum is that it is a next wave or era of the way that things are going to be done. But it's not just the blockchain itself. And I hope that we don't offend anyone, so I have to answer this correctly. Blockchain has been out for a little while, right? When it came on the scene, what did all traditional capital institutions say? Ah, you kidding me? This is a fad. This, whatever, right? They tried. Why? Because it threatened the infrastructure. When I think of that, I think of like a Game of Thrones, right? When the White Walkers are coming and they're sitting there and they're holding their doors and they're going, hold, 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 while they build a plan. That's what institutions did. They knew darn well what blockchain was going to do. Are they going to admit it in the public? Heck no. So they blocked the doors off while they did what? While they started building their own. They started buying the companies and building their own. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh yeah, it's not so bad. Oh, by the way, we have our own version. But blockchain itself can create efficiency, but that value add will soon diminish. And that's something that I think a lot of folks in the blockchain space are not talking enough about. Do we really think that blockchain technology as a value add has evolved that much in the last 60 months? I don't really think so. So why is there so much interest? I put it in this kind of context. Look at what the internet did back in 2000s, right? There were people holding that off going, oh, this is a fluke, because they knew darn well what it could do. And eventually it took over. But the internet is the internet. The reason the internet brought value to the large economy was not the underlying security. It was the derivatives that it began to offshoot.
Yeah.
You cannot have AI without the internet. You cannot have quantum computing without the internet. You would never have bots that are taking over the market without internet. You'd never have quantum computing. So those early investors in the internet, yes, saw value and immediate value. But what really pushed the growth curve of the internet was what the hell it was going to create.
Yeah.
And that's where I think the blockchain space should evolve. Blockchain has the same ability to do that. Your blockchain and my blockchain might look the same, but the people pumping money into blockchain is because what's going to be the AI, quantum computing, and bot world that blockchain is going to produce? That's the interesting component. So now compare that to the crypto space. What is crypto, in my kind of general questions? As a currency, what are your intentions? Is your intention to take over other currencies? Is your intention to compete with other currencies? It brings about a lot of questions. Let's just say you got a phone call from the officials in DC and they said, okay, everyone's going to go crypto. What's the next step with crypto? People have to remember that's when you can start to shift and grab market share from non-traditional investors, traditional. It's more than your value for me right now. Tell me where this is going. And I think blockchain did that far better than the crypto side did.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. We've talked a lot about the various cryptocurrencies. You know, I'm very involved in the YOS.io space. I like that because it's more than just a currency. You know, it's essentially it's a cloud computing supercomputer that you're able to do smart contracts and create applications on. And it really manages kind of distributed information and has a lot of different abilities. So I think that's a pretty good point. The blockchain itself isn't that interesting. For me, currencies aren't that interesting. You know, I like the idea of a free financial system that Bitcoin brings. Of course, we know that that's changing with regulations a little bit. But the truly interesting thing is a lot of the technologies and the companies that'll probably spin up from a lot of these. And you mentioned that traditional investors are starting to take notice. They are starting to see some of the different capabilities. And of course, one of the things that we're talking about today, and we'll be talking about for a long time, is the ability to be able to use traditional securities to be able to raise funds to fill that gap that the ICO left in kind of traditional cryptocurrency projects. And this is like it's a pretty broad question, so I almost feel bad asking you, but what are kind of how are sophisticated investors making decisions on the type of companies that they want to invest in the cryptocurrency space?
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying, and it's one that we must, I think, acknowledge that if we were to look at all available, and let's just take early stage investors,
Yeah.
those that are tilting their compass towards blockchain and crypto is pretty small. But the natives are sort of getting restless. I think that will grow over time. The magnitude and the duration that it takes to grow is going to be, in our opinion, 100% indicative upon the progress and the growth of these blockchain and STO founders. Meaning, this is something we do a lot in the Mindset Startup Academy, is teaching the founders who the heck we are as investors, how we make decisions, because we have to get past products and features, right? And I always tell the founders, if you had 15 minutes with that number one VC firm, how would you spend that 15 minutes? 9 times out of 10, Matt, 90% of that time is products and features. No offense, Snorefest. They get it. You should be spending a very small portion of the time products and features, and then explaining to them the value add that you're going to be able to bring to their portfolio, the way that you're going to manage risk, the way you're differentiating yourself, the way you manage product management over time, the way you're going to manage technology risk. These are the things we have to be able to state. So when we ask how our investors are looking at this particular space, I think they're looking at it no differently than any other industry. They're looking at it for the fundamental building blocks, first of all. They're looking for more than a good idea. They're looking for an investable idea. And they're looking for a team and a set of founders that have their heads screwed on straight, that are capable of doing more than just typing code in a computer. They want that team that is capable of putting on the suit and actually going to sell and can sell ice to an Eskimo. Yeah. They want them to be able to code build the website and go lock up the big deal over at the major corporation that they just set up for them and open the door and not worry they're going to be embarrassed. And they want the kind of guys that don't go home at 5 o'clock, that are going to sleep on the couch in the lobby and are going to do the bookkeeping at night. So I don't think that the particular industry changes the way the investors are actually reviewing. But I do think the population that investors are reviewing inside different industries are very different.
Yeah.
I do think that in the blockchain, crypto, STO space, if we can bundle them together, we see a lot of very highly technical founders, maybe not necessarily the most amount of entrepreneurial experience, but really leaning in hard to the tech, which is good. And there is a small portion of the population of investors that go, hey, Matt, your technology is so good, that other stuff, don't worry about it. We know how to fill the gap. Don't get me wrong, those exist, but they're a minority, right? So if we want to win more of the attention of the investors, and more importantly, if we want to not just win their attention, but we want to get deeper into the engagement process, not just a couple of meetings and they're like, not for me. Get deep in there, then we have to go beyond that technology base. We have to start understanding what they're looking for. And we have to sort of kind of play the role modeling. So maybe they're interested in you and your blockchain technology, and you find out that they've only had one particular blockchain related company they've invested in, and the rest of their portfolio is fintech. First question you got to be asking is, what the heck was it about those fintech companies that they like? Understand the demographic and the makeup of those, and then take a very honest look at the way that you're currently structured and say, how is there any difference or similarity between me and them? Because at the end of the day, most investors are going to say, if it fits within my constraints, it fits within my risk tolerance, it's all legal, and I like the founders, it's a good deal, regardless of what you're selling.
Yeah, I think that that's a really brilliant point. And that's kind of something that I've been talking about a little bit too, because traditionally you could do the website and you could, raise all this cash. The industry really needs to mature. And that's something that, that I'm saying a lot with, at least like with my consulting and some of the projects that I'm working on. I think that we really need to grow up, and we need to get those well-rounded skills. You can't just be a technical founder who hides behind a computer anymore. You have to learn the skills to be able to know what to say, to be able to talk to people, to be able to sell, to be able to do whatever you have to do. Because 9 times, if you're sitting on $10 million and you want to put it in your project and you want to launch it, that's fine. But that's not how traditional companies work these days. And of course, you can launch your product, you can launch your MVP, depending on what the technology is, with a couple $100,000, $500,000, $1 million, whatever else. But at some point, you're going to need to be able to pull in capital to scale. And what I'm noticing based off of kind of the courses that I've done with you and our chats and a lot of the clients that I'm working with is that there's a big gap there, which is really where you come in, where, you do have the technical skills, you understand the product, but there's just, the industry needs to grow up, man. Like the founders of these projects need to gain the skills to be kind of true entrepreneurs, as if you were doing a centralized app in the real world, and they need to understand, various types of offerings. But kind of one thing that we've talked about and you've hinted at is that, and the reason why you did Mindset Startup Academy was primarily because you go into a meeting, you have this great idea, you've done as much work as you can, you've gotten educated, you walk in, you sit down, they shake your hand, and it's over. Do they come back and do they tell you why they gave you the no?
Very rare. It's usually the kiss of death. We call it, sometimes we call it pretty kitty. Like, wow, that's pretty kitty. Okay, we'll see you later. But a lot of times, you're not going to be able to get in front of a lot of professional investors unless you have something they're interested in. But we have to remember in the, in the traditional space, in the startup world, you've got roughly, and no one really knows the true numbers, but if we all put our heads together, you got roughly 100,000 companies. You have roughly under 10,000 professional investors. That's early stage VCs, angels. The industry has a less than 10% success rate. So a lot of times when founders come in, it's not their first rodeo in terms of capital raise. And the first thing that we always want to do when you talk about the industry needs to mature, and I would agree, it's okay, it's early, but those who recognize the difference between their industry and the other industries and are first to exploit that and begin to fill those gaps are going to be the ones, in our opinion, that actually take home the trophy. But the founders were very honest in saying, look, you have a less than 10% success rate. The average duration of a capital raise is going to take you anywhere between 12 and 24 months, which means this might sound romantic and cool to you. Maybe you watched a lot of Shark Tank, and I'm not here to burst your bubble, but you're about to commit thousands of hours over the next couple of years for a 1 in 10 shot at succeeding. Do you really want to do this? And if the answer is yes, then if you're really going to go into this and you've never done this before, and you've never even bothered to hear what a professional investor sounds like, you have no idea what the metrics and data points are that they're reviewing, which tells me you don't even really know if you've done your package or your pitch correct. But you're willing to walk down that dark hallway and just sort of feel your way around. That's the whole process that we want to not necessarily end. We just want to provide a solution for founders. Once they hear that, to go, okay, you're right. I don't know what I'm doing. I know 5 investors. Okay, well, talk to Y Combinator, talk to 500 startups, a few hundred investors to raise every 500,000. So you want to come out and raise $2 million. If you're working with me and we're building out a package, that means we better have a strong list of at least 1,000 names. And you got to be prepared to hear about 900 no's. And to your earlier question, when you hear the no's, professional investors are oftentimes moving so fast, you're not going to really get a lot of feedback. It's probably one thing that we can do better in the investor world. It's usually the kiss of death that we kind of joke about tongue in cheek is, not interested, not really a fit for us, but good luck, or it's kind of interesting. Call us back when you have fill in the blank, right? So that's one of the reasons Mindset Startup Academy that we were a little reluctant to do this at first because it's never been done. We decided that in order to start to fill the gaps in a lot of these things we're talking about, we can teach until we're blue in the face till the cows come home, but we can only teach you the fundamental data points. But here's the really screwed up thing for founders. Those primary data points we teach are 100% subjective. So you and me, Matt, might both be blockchain investors, and we both might have the primary threshold before we write a check to be a certain level of monthly recurring revenue, growth rate, and churn rate. But you and I could have totally different opinions about those. So you got a founder who's going in and he's learning about this particular investor and going, okay, so this is what he wants. And he's trying to kind of lean into that. But he can go into a meeting tomorrow and it's totally different. Yeah. So what we started doing is we start going out, reaching out to the investor funds, overwhelming response. And this is one of the first times that we know of at a mass scale where the managing directors, the fund managers, the director of investments are coming on camera for an hour and saying, hey, world, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is what I invest in, and this is how I do it. And the thought process there, of course, is over the amount of time and building up this cumulative knowledge base, that founders will be able to access that information, begin to study that information, and naturally through that process, they're going to start to hear what the primary data points are. And they're going to be able to start filling the gaps. Because guess what? A majority of what we're covering has nothing to do with your products and features. It has nothing to do with how cool your widget is. It really doesn't. Yes, that gets you in the door. But how you fill the rest of the gaps is what determines an idea and an actual investment.
Absolutely. Yeah. Better rounded entrepreneurs, essentially, right? Which
Yeah.
is kind of the change that's coming, which is why I was really interested in, I did your courses, of course, and I love them. I thought they were really good. I learned a lot because I've just been in the space for a while and I've seen this change. And I think that if you don't know what you're doing, if you have a great idea, if you have something really innovative, if you're really technical, you can still do what you want to do. You know, you won't do it the same way that you did it previously, but it's going to take a little bit of education, a little bit of studying. But in my opinion, if you're a really capable individual, there isn't anything that you can't learn. Or is there? Is there any character traits, just throwing this at you out of kind of left field, what are the character traits of a good founder? What are the character traits of a founder who's going to have some difficulty raising funds?
This is a good one. And if you want to know my ultimate goal in this industry, if I were to leave it 100% successful, it is to define exactly what you just asked. Because to back it up just a little bit, if we were to generalize how investors are reviewing deals, it's two buckets. You notice I like to put things in buckets. You have quantitative data and qualitative data. Quantitative data, as you can imagine, is all the numerics of the business. And for a lot of the early stage companies, these are 100% hypothetical. And then you have to balance that with the qualitative nature. What is that? That's the human capital side of the fence. And as I've told you before, Warren Buffett said it best once, and I'm paraphrasing, you can give me all the quantitative data you want, which is what do you think a lot of founders are giving over? But if you're pre-revenue, pre-customer, and you're very early on, until I understand the qualitative side, I have no context for these numbers. Now, the very difficult thing is that every investor, again, back to the subjective nature of these data points, goes about qualitative analysis very differently because we can't put them in a spreadsheet. You have to read every single situation. And one of my ultimate goals before we leave the industry is we're doing a good job now of teaching quantitative. But we want to at least plant our flag and take a stab at defining what are the proper qualitative traits, at least creating that scale. What do we know about the winning characteristics? Well, one has to be charisma. It's a huge thing. The second thing is integrity. Some of the usual stuff that might sound kind of hokey, but it's not, because again, these are the fundamental characteristics that tell us investors whether or not you're going to be able to execute that plan. And that doesn't mean whether or not you have the technical ability. It means what the hell you're going to do when everything feels like it's falling down around you and your back's up against the wall and you got just smacked in the face with an unforeseen opportunity that would have made most people crawl into the desk and hide. That's where the characteristics come into play. So things such as selling skills, when I talk with investors, is hugely important. A lot of times investors are very impressed when someone has the technical skills and can wear all the different hats. But here's the thing a lot of founders do wrong, is they treat their business plans, in my opinion, and the pitch decks as if it's a resume and you're going in for a job interview. I worked here, and here are my hobbies. How in the heck am I supposed to identify any of these major characteristics? Yeah. So the first step that we're doing in managing the qualitative information is we're challenging a lot of our students and our clients to listen to these particular interviews and then come up with ways to describe yourself, past experiences. How does one actually define charisma in words? How does one actually define improve selling skills? How does one improve integrity? There's a story that I give founders a lot of times to prove this particular concept. And it's a perfect example that I think you and the listeners can extrapolate to what this means to all the other characteristics. But every now and then we'll have a client that we work with to get past their seed or Series A. And, when you build these type of relationships with a company, you're oftentimes the first call back when they're going into their next round. Well, every now and then I get a phone call that they're a little nervous or they're literally outside the building for an investor pitch. One time I got a phone call and he's whispering. I think I told you this story. And I'm wondering, why are you whispering? He says, I'm in the boardroom. I said, okay. He says, he asked me to take a walk. And I said, okay. And he's like, but he wants to take the other ones for a walk. And I went, oh, I know what he's doing. This is an old trick. So I gave him the advice. Sure enough, it was true. And here's what happened. Everything's going real well in the VC space, and this is a big round. One of the VC managers looks over at the CEO and says, hey, let's just take a walk. Just want to get to know. So he's doing it, and he's kind of smoozing him. He says, by the way, chief of operations, how do you know him? Good. What do you think his ambitions are in the company? And he tells him the honest answer. He does this with every single one of them. What do you think he was doing there?
And divide and conquer.
He wanted to know whether or not they were all singing from the same hymn book. He wanted to know if that CMO said, actually, I have no aspirations for being head of the board and CEO of this company. He wants to know how well you know each other.
Yeah.
So the process of due diligence, especially if STOs, and they're getting a lot more meetings with the bigger investment boys, if they're going into that, it's one thing to figure out, how do I define myself on paper to prove these winning characteristics? But when you do that with your team, take the time to get to know each other and your ambitions. Because trust me, in the interview process of due diligence, it's synonymous for a lot of investors. They want to know if they're going to have a problem later on. When we jump $20 million into your gas tank and your valuation jumps from $100 million to $300 million, people change sometimes, right? Well, greed kicks in. Well, power struggles kick in. Granted, it's inevitable. We're never immune from it as investors, but we're going to do anything and everything in our power to head it off the path. So.
That's really insightful. I love it. And one of the things that I picked up from your videos was, of course, having your team in sync, and that includes, having practice pitches, talking to each other, refining kind of all the data points, making sure that everybody understands what's going on inside of that business plan. And I think that was kind of one of the things that I remember you saying particularly, whatever documents that you're putting together, whether it's your cap table, your business plan, fossil records, whatever it might be, it's really important that each member of the team who's going to be in that position where they're pitching to a VC understands and has kind of a common goal and kind of a common understanding of what's in there, what it means, and how they see it playing out. How do you shape, how do you take the time to shape and kind of build teams into cohesively rounded teams that are able to go into some of these investor meetings and get the raise? What are some of the things that you do with some of these teams in order to really kind of make sure that everybody's on the same page?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I actually have a lot of fun with this in the blockchain and the fintech companies, because I can work personally with highly technical teams. As long as they're coachable, right? And I find a lot of those type characteristics in the fintech and blockchain space, which is very quantitative, sometimes introverted, but very methodical, right? And those are winning characteristics in my own opinion, because they can compartmentalize things. So once we've really gotten down to the real brass tacks of what the heck they're selling, who their audience is, how do I prove to an investor that I truly am solving a pain point? But a thing they don't often forget is, how are you solving an urgent pain point? Then we're looking at the financials and making sure these are reasonable. We're not showing a growth curve that does this. We're showing a realistic growth curve, right? Once we've got all those components, then what we do is we sit down with the team. And if they're the luxury of a larger team, we oftentimes tell the C-suite executives, you shouldn't be leaving that person out there. There's a value. Let's bring them into the fold, to what you said earlier. We don't care if it's the assistant hanging out answering the phones. It's a team effort in the process. The first thing that we tell a lot of the founders is, you don't make decisions in a vacuum. You guys sit in that boardroom long enough and make decisions, and you guys are going to start agreeing with everything that you're saying. You have to take every opportunity that you have from outside opinion or influence to get true, honest, and open feedback, right? And you have to be You have to be open to understanding that feedback. So even though that person might be the creative director or might be in terms of productions, getting them involved is a great opportunity to build that cohesive structure. But even at the very high level, the team founders, there's a tendency sometimes to just pick a leader and he's the talker and the rest just sort of stay in their lane. We oftentimes do a couple of exercises where we'll switch roles. So once we know what our primary pitch is, so let's say that's the CEO, and then the ITO, CTO, they all know their roles, so they got their pitch down, and then we'll say switch. All right, so now the CTO is going to go play the CEO's role, and the CEO's role is going to try to play the CIO's role. They're never going to play it perfect, but that idea of being able to pick up where the other hand leaves off, if we're sitting across from you on a board, as you can imagine, trust us. Yeah. You can tell. You can tell when they're disconnected. Now, what is that doing from the ability of qualitative skill sets? That's phenomenal. It's just showing a team in sync. They're finishing each other's sentences. If that CTEO got picked up by Cisco because they gave them a golden parachute package, I'm pretty confident these guys are going to fill the gap until they find a replacement. So getting everyone in on the team, understanding your lanes, switching the lanes, taking as much outside input, and mock test, mock test, mock test, mock test. And if you're truly open to the responses, you take in that information and you implement it, you could run laps around a lot of founders that go into intro meetings and final meetings with investors for sure.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think at some point, maybe in a later interview, because I know we're hoping to do a few of these ultimately, but I wanted to take the time to address something that I think is more applicable to the digital asset space, and particularly when it comes to kind of getting your seed funding together. There's something that was called the Jobs Act and crowdfunding that I believe it allows you to raise up to 1.07 million. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, which is really, really innovative because you can actually allow people who aren't accredited investors to be able to get in kind of on the early stage project. What is the Jobs Act? What did it enable? And what would you consider it a good tool for early stage startups looking to be able to raise capital on a micro level before moving to their Series A?
Crowdfunding?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Jobs Act underneath the Obama administration was a pretty powerful tool. You know, what it did was it did a couple of things that a lot of people know about, and did a couple of things that us insiders actually recognized and were waiting for, in my opinion. So the Jobs Act restructured portions of Reg D, which was huge. So it introduced Reg CF, which is crowdfunding. We had the adoption of Reg A's, and it also made modifications to the Reg D components that we spoke of earlier. And those Reg D components were actually, how would I say, clarifying or streamlining as opposed to a bit more complex. So it did a lot of really good things, but more importantly, what it did is it added clarity to a lot of it, right? And what underpins all of this, that a lot of, when I say what the insiders followed, is the idea of accredited investors. So we talked earlier on in raising capital about the rules of solicitation and what is a transaction and door number one, door number two, where there's another layer that overlays that, which is accredited investor and non. So a accredited investor, and don't quote me if you file singly, is what, $250,000 a year income or $1 million net worth. If you're married, it's $350,000 or $1 million net worth. But keep in mind that net worth actually excludes your primary residence. And for decades, the SEC has put a lot of their rules and regulations towards accredited investors and didn't ever really give a lot of attention or guidance to companies soliciting non-accredited investors. Why is that? It's a very consumer protectionary type rule. But what underlays this is the spirit that an accredited investor is someone by nature of success who should have more understanding, more sophistication, and since we're not there regulating that process like a registered security, then they should be able to sort of fend for themselves, buyer beware. But you take that approach and go to a non-accredited investor, by the nature of their financial success, they could get duped, right? Now, that's worked very well for a long time. But my old world of wealth management, financial planning, and other securities have been knocking on the door of SEC going, wait a minute, this is 2020, okay? You've got kids making money, becoming millionaires, and hitting a accredited investor, and you mean to tell me he's sophisticated? Like, times have changed. We can't determine someone's sophistication of investment by the nature of their net worth or how they spend their money. That's silly. That's archaic, right? And financial planning industry and everyone's been pumping on the SEC, and they've been a staunch conservative. But Job Acts, to your question, was the first that gave guidance to non-accredited investors. Reg CF basically said, hey, contribute $100, contribute $1,000. Heck, we're going to allow you to market them on websites. And the industry went nuts. For the first time in history, they're like, whoa, wait a minute. So you're going to take power away from the institutions and you're going to allow these guys to market directly to non-accredited investors? Jobs said, yeah, as long as you follow these rules. Now, the way they were able to parse those two sides of the equation together is, notice that you talked about with the dollar amounts of Reg CF. Yes, they've limited it. So you're not going to steal grandma's pension for a retirement account. It should be fairly minimize the risk. So that was a really big thing that the Jobs Act did. It started to test the notion of what accredited investors are. If I had my way personally, and I'm sure a lot of people agree with me, we would be fortunate enough in the near future to have an addendum or a subsequent set of laws that finally goes and creates a proper litmus test for what is accredited and not. Because I think the idea of $250,000 or $1 million of income is just something that doesn't really fly anymore. And this is important for the STO markets. We talked about before, is regulation good? It's got a lot of value. Yeah, you got to learn a few new tricks, but guess what? They're not that complicated, right? And they're there also to protect you as well. So if an STO is a security and you know you're in Reg D, then you have the ability to better understand who your investor audience is. It doesn't mean you can't have unaccredited investors. It just means you have to have your paperwork, your ducks in a row. You got certain rules of engagement in terms of how you solicit them. You have certain rules of engagements to identify and prove that you've done your homework to understand their investment background. That's all really.
Yeah, that's a really good analysis. I think that personally, Reg CF regulation crowdfunding is going to be a really important tool, particularly for blockchain, because it allows early startup founders to be able to kind of get their product out there and then solicit a larger audience with that kind of non-accredited being opened up a little bit, up to $1.07 million, which in a lot of cases is more than enough for them to be able to build their MVP. Do you see a high probability that the ICO, which I've kind of said the ICO is a dying fundraise, will be replaced with Reg CF followed up by kind of Series A, B, C, mezzanine, and then IPOs later on? Do you see that as something that could potentially replace the ICO? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think ICOs will exist in the foreign markets. To what extent, I don't know. I think that the SEC has made it pretty clear that the idea of an initial coin offering, you can call it whatever you want, as long as it fits within our confines of Reg D.
Yeah.
I think it's a great opportunity for those STOs that grab this, take it head on. Yeah, you still have a lot of lack of clarity, but from a general purpose standpoint, I think the SEC's made it pretty clear that if you're exchanging value for a token, for cash, for a share, call it whatever you want, it's a security. So grab it by the horns. Be those STOs that understand the rules. And our job in working with companies is obviously to explain these things. And when you learn what they are and how to harness them, gosh, it makes it a heck of a lot easier to jump in a conference call and knocking on doors. They're giving you a lot of horsepower, but you got to learn how to drive a car. And a lot of people that sit back and they're like, I don't want to learn to drive a car. Okay, then don't. But at the same time, then you don't have a lot of merit here to be complaining that they're leaning over you. You're not using the horsepower they're giving you. I think that CFs are a good thing in principle. Here's where I see the downfall. When you create a CF, you're oftentimes going to utilize one of these CF-related companies online. And that is for most companies, reactive mode. which means I post it, but then how am I marketing it? Well, you got to be careful how you market because there's rules on that too. So you're hoping that that site's going to drive the necessary traffic you need to bring the foot in the door. And I think sometimes that gives founders a false sense of security and they take their hands off the wheel. I think there is a huge market for STOs and Reg D. We're very excited about working with STO companies on Reg D in 2020 and beyond, because Reg D has so much horsepower if the founders are willing to put in the work. And by work, I mean pound the pavement, old school style, smile and dial. Here's your list, here's your markets, go. And you've got a lot of founders that will not sleep, they'll go. And if you put the work into learning how to drive that race car, you can win championships. The one to the spirit of your question, though, that I'm still, the jury's out on me for, is Reg A. You know, again, sounds great in theory, but Reg A is essentially a mini IPO, and there is a lot of cost to it. Okay, it's not a sports car. That's basically a Nürburgring champion. That's how much horsepower is in that particular opportunity. And although it sounds sexy and romantic, I think a lot of founders could find themselves in position slightly underwhelmed with the results, given the high level of due diligence and cost. Essentially what a Reg A is doing is it's forcing you to go through a series of requirements with the SEC. There's that exchange. And remember, whenever you're exchanging paperwork with the SEC, your attorney bills can just... But if you can pass that process, it gives you the ability to essentially market in the public domain, which means you could literally build broad-based marketing campaigns from social media, TV to radio if you felt like it. You can't do that a lot of times in certain aspects of CF, and you can only do it in one aspect of Reg D, which is your 506C. So Reg A is, you want to talk about Reg D having horsepower? Reg A has double the horsepower, because if you make it through the gauntlet, you could literally market like any other company. Now, granted, if you're going to go out, put your pedal to the metal and market Reg A, you can only imagine the compliance costs that you have, right? You've got bean counters and attorneys following every single move. So it's not just like a race car. It's something even beyond a race car. But it does fit a specific niche of founders. I'm just seeing certain founders that tried it and went, wait a minute, like, what is all this? Like, this is over engineering for me. So that's why I say the jury's still out on it. I think Reg A is like that product that needs a new marketer.
Yeah. What I'm hearing you say essentially, though, is it's all fine and good. You know, you can go to a CF, you can do a Reg A, you can do whatever, but at the end of the day, you still need to know how to solicit investors. You still need to have your foot on the gas pedal going after those investors. You still need to know what the data points are. You know, you need to understand their risk levels and what the risk is. You just really, the industry needs to grow up. We need to become true entrepreneurs. 2017 is over. The ICO, in my opinion, is gone. It's done. It's not a viable way to raise money anymore, and maybe it shouldn't be. Most of the ICOs that I see these days absolutely tank and get destroyed. And just founders are going to have to go out and learn the soft skills to be able to go out and talk to investors, to be able to bring their projects up, which is important. And I think that a lot of founders can do it, and they do have it inside of themselves, but you do have to dedicate a certain amount of time to kind of increasing your entrepreneurial skills from wherever you might be to here. And as we've talked about multiple times too, no VC and no investor expects the one founder to know absolutely everything, but they do have to be relatively well-rounded and understand kind of the game and what investors are looking for ultimately, right? Is that accurate?
No, it's totally accurate. And that's why, I'm looking forward to our future pieces as well, because I think there need to be more people from the traditional side in my world that are sharing these type stories. I think with that crash came incredible disappointment, almost like a sadness almost came over it. And I can understand why. It looked like the getting was good, right? I could do no wrong. Sure, I could throw a dart at a dartboard and I would win. So when that rug is pulled, yeah, it could seem pretty deflating. But maybe I'm just a glass half full kind of guy. But I'm like, hey, wait a minute, guys. What guys like me know, it's not that complicated. In fact, if you utilize it properly, you could run gangbusters. Because if there's a good underlying business, and you truly have the ability to create true economic value, then heck, there are plenty of people out there like us that will show you how to go out there and do it. You just can't be afraid of the hard work. You can't be afraid of a no, because you're going to talk to hundreds of them. But with the proper training and the proper learning, the one thing it won't be is throw up a website and let them come to you. That part we can pretty much guarantee. But the rest of it, it's not rocket science. You built that fancy blockchain widget, trust me, this is a walk in the park for you.
Absolutely. I think that it's a good thing that we have this like maturity happening to the industry, because I think that it's going to make sure that the projects, as you say, people aren't going out there, they're not spending their life savings to develop something that the market doesn't want because of regulation, have to be tested. They have to be, you have to basically have a good idea. You have to have all the right moving parts in place. I think that regulation coming in is a good thing for blockchain. I think we're going to see better quality projects, better structured projects, more viable products, and I'm excited about it as well. So I wanted to, I'll probably cut it short here for today, Verlin. I could go on and talk to you forever, and I'm sure we will in some future episodes. I just wanted to take a second and say that if you are in the process, whether it's even for a traditional company or a blockchain or a fintech company, if you're looking to raise some money, and even though you might not need to raise it right away, I can guarantee you there are some things that you need to know before you start putting together your business structure and making decisions, because there are some things that can really mess you up at the start. I really highly suggest that you go out and you get in touch with Verlin. I'm going to make sure I leave a link for all of his things below. Just take some of his courses, try it out, reach out to him, because Verlin can really, if you have a good idea and you have a good business, Verlin can kind of help get you to that next stage where you can go out and solicit investors and kind of teach you the ropes. So Verlin, man, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
You're welcome. That was fun.
It was fun. We'll do it again sometime soon. I look forward to that. And take care. Happy New Year. And I think it's going to be a good 2020.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Verlin. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.